question for you. What do you think when I show you this? Or maybe this? What do you associate with these images? What is it that comes to mind when you gaze upon the humble and stubborn goat? Do you see images of heresy, blood-stained beasts, harrowing sacrifices, and obscene displays of lust? Or do you perhaps see something different? A symbol of abundance, a scion of agriculture, or a true-born child of the natural world? The answer is in the eye of the beholder. But I am ever curious. What do you think of the goat? Welcome back to the Stygian Study, folks. I got a bit of a short and sweet one here for you today, since the development of my other videos has evolved quite a bit, with one of them just straight up looking like it's going to be a 6-part series. So I figured we'd change gears and do something quick before I go on a small vacation. So tonight, we are going to be discussing the woefully misunderstood and oftentimes willfully misrepresented goat, and their symbology in media and history. This is also going to be the first in a series I have titled Magic and Monsters, where we will explore occult and mythological ideas through a series of essays, some small and some large, both in written and video format. And yes, this will be a shorter one than normal, as I am getting a little bit more of a feel for these abstract topics and how to structure essays for them to make them understandable for you guys. My previously scheduled videos is still in development, including the Fear and Hunger Cosmology Part 3, but that and future videos will take a good amount of time to be fully realized. So, in any case, grab a blanket, maybe a beverage or two, and let's learn about Caprahirsis and why these little guys are so much more than just an idol of heresy. So, as it stands in the modern day, goats are creatures that are largely used in media to represent some sort of blasphemy. Namely in horror movies such as The Witch, where the titular villain of the story, the Devil, takes form of a black goat named Black Phillip, and he tempts the main characters with a life of decadent delights. Or in the various heavy metal albums that have been released throughout the ages, goats are often used to denotate the presence of the unholy, vile, or evil, and generally shock suburban mothers. Looking at you, Slayer. And this symbol of the goat is utilized to be synonymous with Satan himself. Or even look at video games like Elden Ring Night Reign, where the boss Libra is constantly referred to as a demon, and bears the head of a goat and uses the most forbidden magic of the Frenzied Flame, and will strike detrimental bargains with the player if they so choose to partake with him. And if one simply Googles the devil, this image shows up everywhere, and I mean everywhere. The imagery of the little goat, hooves, the horns, the redness, that all must mean the devil, yeah? Right? Well, no. You see, this figure, which has become very famous for being satanic or representative of Satan or Lucifer, is not actually the devil, nor is it Satan. It is Baphomet, a name you have probably heard, but seldom ever heard much more about. You always just assumed it was a moniker, or at least many have assumed it was some sort of alternative identity for the devil. And despite what common knowledge may have led you to believe, Baphomet is actually an entity that originates from a drawing by Eliphas Levi, a famed occult philosopher from the 19th century, and is not the secret heretic idol of the Knights Templar, another common myth espoused in the modern day. And the Knights Templar were an order of holy knights that held incredible power across Europe that were dismantled after the governments of Europe found out that, hey, the church having a massive military that's more powerful and rich than all of our governments combined is really uncomfortable. So, with that in mind, they decided to start persecuting the Knights Templar and accusing them of forbidden worship of heads and idols, actual words that were used in these accusatory texts, including that of a goat's skull. Now, circling back to Eliphas Levi, as I said, he was an incredible and famed occultist of the 19th century, and his most famous work Doctrine and Ritual of High Magic, which is his magnum opus, is where we first see Baphomet represented. And Baphomet is actually a representation of a concept called the astral light, which is this occult concept that embodies all the energetic forces within the universe and is the driving force behind magic itself. And we could talk all about what's in the imagery of Baphomet, but what's important today is that we're going to be talking about that goat head that he has. And that goat head is meant to symbolically represent an attachment to the earth. And in truth, Baphomet as an entity represents nature itself and all of its messiness. Side note, if you're curious about the supposed ties to the Knights Templar, it's important to note that this accusations of heads and idols being used as worship were bits of information that were acquired during very brutal torture, and as we know, things that are said during torture are not great evidence, as someone will say pretty much anything if it means getting a Judas's cradle removed from your body. And if you don't know what that is, Google it. It's horrifying. In truth, the connection of the mythical figure of Baphomet to the Knights Templar and their descendants, the Freemasons, actually comes from an incredibly elaborate hoax by a man named Gabriel Yogan Pages. I think I nailed that pronunciation, who carried the pen name Leo Taxi. And the greater context of that is that during the 19th century, when the Catholic Church was starting to really lose its power, and the Freemasons, as I said, a group born from the remains of the Knights Templar, or at least so they claim, were rising in influence, the new Pope Leo XIII targeted the Masons for the reasoning behind their waning power of the Church, as it had to be those sorcerers. And the Church wanted to be able to demonize them. They wanted to turn them into the scapegoat as for why the Catholic Church was losing power. And so Leo Taxi gave them their scapegoat. He took the imagery of Eliphas Levi's Baphomet and connected it with Lucifer. And with the Masons being connected to the Knights Templar, and with the Templars being connected to Baphomet, even though no such relation ever actually existed, this solidified Baphomet as somehow being a representation of Lucifer/Satan, even though there was no relation to those forces at all, and Satan is actually a very modern concept. Then to solidify this connection further, Anton LaVey, in all of his brilliant fucking wisdom, decided to use the iconography of Baphomet and the goat to denotate the devil in his imagery of the pentagram. And for those of you who don't know who Anton LaVey is, he was the founder of Satanism back in the 1960s. So he took the imagery of Baphomet and used it to scare people and to be offensive. And when people saw Baphomet, they were like, oh, yikes, it's the devil. Hence why extreme art began using the goat for the devil as well, because it scared the pants off of suburban Christian America. And of course, I would be a fool if I did not mention the classical imagery of the witches' Sabbath and the witch hunts from the 1400s and 1700s, wherein the mystical witches' Sabbath usually depicts being led by a goat or a goat man or some other variant of a horned bestial man. I won't be diving into the entirety of that history here because that would require a way longer video, and frankly, it takes us off topic. The final note on the goat's evolution as a symbol for blasphemy / the infernal is this idea that the goats were, at least in the Middle Ages, a symbol of lust. Now, this is where I get a little out of my personal wheelhouse, as I am going to touch on Greek mythology a bit, and I am by no means an expert, so please, if I get anything wrong, sound off in the comments so I may course correct. The concept of goats being linked with lust in the Middle Ages is something I cannot directly find evidence of, but it's possible that this imagery, this symbology, was drawn from the fact that goats were a symbol of fertility in antiquity, and this is embodied in the comedically horny satyrs, who were companions of the god Dionysus, and satyrs were goat men who were bestial, ugly pranksters, who were shrewd and known for the harassment of nymphs and mortal women alike. Thus, it stands to reason that their symbology, as it relates to goats, along with the goats' rather messy mating habits, and their relation to fertility makes them synonymous with lust, sex, and desire. And with goats becoming chief representation of the most infernal forces in the Middle Ages / Christian mythology, this relation to perhaps one of the most reviled sins of all, lust, made them symbolic of this lustful force. Furthermore, the idea of the goats being representative of blasphemous / sinful forces originates from the Old Testament of the Bible, wherein 2 goats were chosen for a ritual known as the scapegoat. One goat is chosen to be sacrificed to God and somehow gets the better end of the stick, and this goat is dedicated to God and slaughtered in his name. The other goat, which is the scapegoat, is chosen to symbolically bear humanity's sins and is released back into the wild, which does touch upon the wide reaching ideas in some Abrahamic religions that the wild and nature is sinful and corrupt. But that's a different story, different day. So, as one can see, the goat being a symbol of blasphemy is actually derived from a very long and winding history across many different cultures and mythologies. Compounded this with some dedicated smear campaigns from the Catholic Church and the demonization of nature, then pile on some good old exploitative art and misrepresentation, and now we have the goat as this prime symbol of the unholy, the rebellious, the blasphemous, and sinful. But that's not really all they are. Goats are not just horned deliverers of sin, they are symbols of so much more. And the cultures beyond that of the Christian faith of Europe elucidates us into the several ways that this is. Now, for the sake of sanity, I won't be going over every single little detail of every single little correspondence in existence, because oh my god, there's a lot. But the goal is to touch upon enough of these to help shine a light on a few more of these unknown meanings, or less popular meanings, including my own personal interpretation of their imagery. The goat is often a symbol of the earth, and this is shown not only through the previous touch upon Baphomet, but the correspondences that can be drawn from many different places. And it is important to note that when Baphomet was drawn, their imagery was crafted with purpose. And thus, the goat head that Baphomet bears is a purposeful choice, and that goat head was chosen to be representative of the earth and a connection to it. And I believe this correspondence that LFS Levi drew upon was from the various appearances of goats with earth-related spirits in mythology. In Greek mythology, the god Pan, the god of the wilds, was known for his goat-like appearance, and satyrs, as covered earlier, accompanied him and are spirits related to his being. This connection to the earth could also be drawn from the fact that, despite being domesticated, goats, if left in the wild, will very quickly revert back to their feral states and thus rewild themselves. Goats are also famous in astrology as the sign of Capricorn, which is represented by a sea goat, and the sign Capricorn is an earth sign known for being intelligent, hardworking, and slightly stubborn. The goat in this case illustrates many of these characteristics and embodies many of those earthly traits that give Capricorns many of their distinctive traits. On the note of Capricorn, the fish half of the sea goat is meant to represent a hidden or spiritual depth that is not a typical trait of earth signs. Most would not initially think of goats as a symbol of abundance, but there are several myths relating to the creatures in this aspect. I mean, it only makes sense seeing as in our everyday lives, goats are beasts of burden that can haul great amounts of weight. They are excellent for agriculture by giving us milk and cheese, along with being excellent landscapers. Goats have been a part of many pastoralist and agricultural societies since humans first cropped up, and there are many ritual practices that honor sacrificing these creatures for either spiritual or material means. I even partook in one myself, in a smaller ritual when I spent time in Kenya with the Maasai, though I didn't actually see the goat get slaughtered. We were spared that, as they thought, ooh, Westerners have very soft stomachs and they won't be able to see that. However, it did happen. However, that is only one of the few rituals that are undertaken to revere that which the goat gives. In Norse mythology, Thor rode a chariot pulled by goats, and every day he would slaughter these goats to eat them, taking special care not to break or harm their bones, placing them exactly as they were in life, so that he could bring them back to life in the morning of each day. And in Valhalla, the warriors of that realm would drink the mead that was made by the milk of a divine goat kept in Valhalla's halls. Another example of the goats being a symbol of abundance and fertility is from Greek mythology, wherein Zeus was kept hidden away in a cave to be hidden from his father Cronus lest he be devoured. Assigned to caring for him was the goat Amalthea, and as the story goes, Zeus accidentally broke off one of her horns, and there are conflicting accounts around this story, by the way, just putting that out there. But after he accidentally broke it off, Zeus blessed this horn as a sign of gratitude, and from it flowed endless food and drinks, and whoever possessed it would gain whatever they wanted in life. And perhaps it is from the ghost's existence as a beast of burden and their propensity to be sacrificed for their material need that the goat then became related as a sign of endless abundance, for its endless giving to humankind over history. So to dive out of the purely mythological and to shift more towards the modern representations of goats, I want to talk about what I have seen these goats commonly representing. A common theme I have come to see goats represent or be involved in is that of apotheosis or some form of transcendence, a burgeoning of the mind or abilities beyond earthly limits. I mentioned it earlier in this video, and I want to discuss it more here. Libra, the creature of the night from Elden Ring Night Rain, a mysterious entity who has invaded the lands between, offering deals of fool's gold through a form of dubious alchemy, and the strength of kings, all for his benefit. He's the only boss in the game we have extensive interactions with, as most of the bosses are relegated to just being fought once. But we speak to Libra. We get to converse with him and learn a little bit more about him. Libra is considered a demon in this game, and he wields the profane power of the Frenzied Flame, or at least a variant of it. Which, to those who aren't in the loop, the Frenzied Flame is a magical power from Elden Ring that essentially inflicts mind-numbing madness on any who are within its range, both caster and victim. Libra carries this divine aura to him. His spells are gold, and they are drawn in the air with divine sigils, and he is incredibly intelligent, even pitting us against other NPCs while we fight him in his third phase, opting in more to play mind games rather than fight us physically. He does something that's very fascinating to me. He stops mid-fight to meditate, and if he completes his meditative ritual, he will empower himself by casting far more devastating spells and elevating his very being. Furthermore, when he transitions into his third phase, it seems he rips his chest cavity open, revealing a gigantic eye in the center, which is a good time to mention this about Libra's visual design, is that he has multiple eyes all over his body, which is a classical symbol of enlightenment. This, compounded with the fact that Libra uses madness as his primary power, and it also serves as his primary weakness, which, of note, madness and brilliance often rhyme as concepts. It illustrates this idea that Libra has gained so much spiritual knowledge that it has elevated him in some way. However, what sells it for me is that Libra uses alchemy in order to utilize his powers. And alchemy is, in essence, the metaphysical process of transmuting oneself into a higher form, meaning Libra is literally attempting to transcend through every interaction we have with him. Now, I have talked extensively about goats as a symbol of blasphemy and the unholy. What I have not talked about is what this tie to the infernal divine, as it is called, has done to the goat as a symbol within the traditions of Satanism itself. And as someone who has read much on what is referred to as the left-hand path, that is to say, the magical tradition which deals with self-deification, the working with the infernal divinity, individuality, and the pursuit of one's desires, aka Satanism, goats are still very much a common symbol, and in keeping with them too having evolved a meaning that is tied to just this tradition. A goat can be a symbol of the left-hand path and thus representative of the forces of self-deification that push or desire to push beyond mortal boundaries and transcend into something more. And something else I want to talk about that I honestly had just thought about while trying to record this video, if we want to talk about the ideas of transcendence, if we look at athletes and athletics, the term or acronym GOAT, greatest of all time, is a transcendental phrase. It means if you call someone the GOAT, it means they are so great that they have gone beyond the boundaries of their own sport. They are now kind of this icon of the sport itself. Their skills are so vast and so great that they have transcended what would be someone that only someone within an in-group would know about. Like, look at Michael Jordan. He is a common figure. Or look at LeBron James, to name two basketball players. Or even look at Tom Brady. Like, people who don't watch football know who Tom Brady is. This status of being the GOAT is transcendental in itself, inadvertently created. But a final piece I want to touch upon is the movie The Witch, which I mentioned earlier, wherein the main antagonist, the devil, spoiler alert, by the way, is represented by a goat named Black Phillip, who is subtly causing chaos and driving our main character to pursue the witch in the woods to join them. In the end, he succeeds, and our main character gathers around a fire with a coven of witches, and they take flight into the night with Black Phillip as the guiding hand of this mass. I know it ties more back into the ideas covered in the first section, but I wanted to share more of my personal view of how this animal in media has been shaped in the modern day. And I think it's important because we think of symbologies and iconography within only the archaic sense, and like, oh, it's that appeal to antiquity, that old in style that's like oh, what matters is what it meant to those people back then, but we are creating new mythologies every single day. So to me, this is important because to point out that goats have become this new symbol of transcendental apotheosis. So, I ask you, what does goat mean to you when you see it? If you've made it this far, congrats. You're at the end of the video. Like I said, short and sweet, kind of more of like a rambling of ideas that I have in my head. Not something I wanted to make like a full, proper, constructed, super in-depth, well-researched video essay about, but more me just talking about ideas. And also, you know, I'm going on vacation, so I won't be here next week at all. If you like this, please subscribe. I'm going to be covering more subjects like this in greater depth here on this channel, as I love studying mythology, the occult, and human cultures. It's actually like the foundation of why I really pursued this, because I love talking about this, and I want to hear other people's perspectives and ideas as well. So, if that interests you, drop a like, maybe leave a comment if you want, and if you really want, you can support me on Ko-Fi. You don't have to do it, I just kind of have it open as a tip jar. Regardless, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're at in the world, and thank you so much for stopping by the Stygian Study. Toodles!